Within the wizarding world of Harry Potter, Severus Snape is undoubtedly the most controversial character in the series. And it's not particularly difficult to see why. Because in a world that is almost entirely populated with straightforward, uncomplicated heroes and obvious vicious villains, Severus Snape is arguably the lone character that undeniably fits into both of these categorizations and neither of them. Regardless of the popularity or enjoyability of the Harry Potter series, it's difficult to avoid the fact that author J.K. Rowling doesn't typically write these characters or stories with an enormous amount of complexity. Most characters fit into classic archetypes and do exactly what is expected of them throughout the books. And even the twists and turns that are meant to be surprises are typically the kind of surprises that the audience has become completely accustomed to after a lifetime of mainstream media consumption. But what makes Severus such an interesting character is that he is unquestionably and irrefutably a villain, and he is unquestionably and irrefutably a hero. Thus, it's not particularly shocking that he's the most divisive character in the story itself. Nearly every major character in the series is distinctively villainous or heroic. And although there are occasions where they might seemingly cross a line that takes them outside of their chosen character archetype, it's never anything severe or intense enough for the audience to question everything that they know about that individual or about the moral structures of the entire story itself. But that isn't so with Snape. It's actually incredibly interesting, because clearly Snape's true allegiance and intentions are meant to be one of the biggest mysteries throughout the story. Both sides of the Wizarding War genuinely believe that Severus is working with them, and the question regarding whose beliefs are actually correct aren't even answered until the very last moments of Snape's life. And, given that the Harry Potter saga follows a pretty stereotypical storyline, with the plucky heroes winning out against the fascistic villains just in time for summer break each year, the question of who Severus Snape is and why he does what he does is truly one of the few big enigmas within the novel series. And surprisingly, the answer is almost more compelling and complex than the question itself. Severus is clearly a character who isn't naturally prone to sharing his feelings. So it's entirely unclear why he's doing what he does, until he finally reveals his ultimate motivation at the very end of his character arc. And the fact that his primary motivation is Lily is actually genuinely shocking. Largely because while Snape doesn't share his emotions, his feelings are really the driving force behind all of his decisions. Plenty of Harry Potter fans who have no love for Snape have pointed out that a lot of his behavior towards Lily is classic nice guy bullshit. And that is a completely fair critique. But it's still vital to his character arc and the value of his character within the narrative, specifically because it's so self-centered. Snape's attitude towards Lily and the world at large is extremely selfish, which makes him stick out from the crowd in the Harry Potter world, but also makes his story more interesting and relatable. The characters in Harry Potter are all wonderful in their own way. But one thing that the cast of characters is largely lacking are people who aren't doing something because of some grander design or belief system. Most of the people who follow Voldemort are doing so because they sincerely believe in their own supremacy and think that they have a right to power over others. And most of the people who fight for Harry are doing so because they sincerely believe in the rights of non-purebloods. Or because their lives literally depend on Voldemort not seizing power. Ergo, Severus is truly a deviation from the norm. Obviously, that could never excuse or explain his terrible choices, but it's actually emotionally resonant and relatable specifically because of how mundane it is. Snape didn't become drawn to the dark arts because of some ideological devotion to evil. He did it simply because he was a bullied kid with no friends, who finally found acceptance through dark magic. And he didn't start fighting to take down Voldemort because he suddenly realized that it was the morally upright thing to do. He did it because he lost someone he loved, as a result of following Voldemort in the first place. Every one of Snape's choices is deeply personal and driven by his own feelings. And he often doesn't understand the gravity of those choices until it's too late. But in a story that's built within a framework of good versus evil, it has never been about good versus evil for Severus. Unsurprisingly, this duality makes Snape more appealing to some fans and less appealing to others. A character who seems to have little interest in broader philosophical ideas of right and wrong, and whose actions seem to be purely driven by their own passions and prejudices, is not what most readers expect from fantasy characters. But the banality of Snape's choices also makes him undeniably more understandable than many of the other players in the Harry Potter universe. The reality is, most people in the real world can likely relate to Severus more than nearly any other character in the series, purely because his actions are so self-motivated. Most people certainly have their own morals and beliefs, but Snape's decisions to do what he wants when he wants, for his own reasons, are far more understandable than characters who are constantly putting their lives on the line for some larger purpose. Snape is also sympathetic in a more frightening and unsettling sense too. Because his character arc is a perfect example of the reality that most people don't know they're making the biggest decisions of their lives when they're actually making them. Severus did nearly everything that he did simply because it made him feel better or because he thought he could get something he wanted out of it. But the ripple effect of those choices were completely cataclysmic. He told Voldemort about a prophecy, which was a decision that got the only person that Severus ever loved killed. And although his decision to switch sides was primarily driven by a desire to avenge Lily and provide some penance for his horrendous mistake, that choice may have literally saved the entire wizarding world. It's interesting how that selfish motivation dovetails with the larger themes of the Harry Potter series as well. Because while love is meant to be the greatest and most powerful magic of all, Snape is an ironic insight into the fact that the magic of love doesn't necessarily always yield beneficial results. Lily's love for Harry may have saved his life, but Snape's unrequited love for Lily is what inadvertently ended hers. It's not even clear if that irony was intentional, but Snape's entire story is a poignant example that while love is powerful, that power doesn't always end in happiness and rainbows. Severus Snape is an incredibly divisive character because he's a genuine villain and a genuine hero, despite the fact that he never intended to be either. That notion in itself is terrifying, but also feels very real, as it's frighteningly believable that the fate of the world could rest in the hands of someone who isn't acting on behalf of some higher purpose or duty, but is simply doing what they want or what feels right for them at the time. And whether Harry Potter fans love him or hate him, there's no denying that Severus Snape's feelings irrevocably altered the wizarding world. The nature of Severus Snape was one of the biggest questions in the Harry Potter saga. And while the answer to that question was straightforward, it wasn't simple. His character development exemplified the fact that one person can be capable of genuine good and genuine evil. And it's entirely possible that these benevolent or malevolent acts can sometimes be driven by neither kindness or malice. Considering the end of the Harry Potter story, it seems safe to say that J.K. Rowling always intended for Severus to be a hero. And while he was a good guy, he was irrefutably a bad guy too. And that's truly what made him an interesting and dimensional character. But what do you think? Leave your comments and opinions below. And if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.